Have you ever wondered what would happen if the border between America and Canada suddenly shifted? Picture this: certain states growing tired of Washington's politics or captivated by Canada's stability actually deciding to break away. Sounds impossible? Think again. The reality is that several states already maintain profound economic, cultural, and even political connections with Canada. Imagine Vermont embracing its independence and simply leaving, or Minnesota feeling more at home with its northern neighbor. And what about Alaska, already physically separated from the mainland? Some of these possibilities might shock you, while for others, the writing is already on the wall. Let's dive into this fascinating scenario. Before we get into it, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates from our channel. And trust me, Number 5 might completely change how you see the United States, so stay until the end. Number 10. Vermont. What if there was a state that already felt more Canadian than American? With its maple syrup production, quaint small towns, and breathtaking autumn scenery, Vermont could potentially be the first to wave goodbye to the United States. This remarkable state carries a significant history of independence, once existing as its own sovereign republic before officially joining the Union in 1791. From a political standpoint, Vermont strongly favors progressive policies, mirroring its northern neighbor's approach. Here's where things get particularly interesting. A portion of residents are already advocating for departure. A movement known as the Second Vermont Republic has been actively campaigning for secession for years, arguing that the state would thrive better independently. When you consider the robust trade relationships with Quebec, a mutual appreciation for social programs, and an economy built around industries that naturally align with Canada's, suddenly the concept of Vermont breaking away doesn't seem so far-fetched. Could we witness America's first genuine secession in hundreds of years? Number 9. Maine. Would you believe that one American state already relies on Canada for its very survival? Without its northern neighbor, Maine would struggle with something as basic as providing electricity to its citizens. This is because Maine imports a substantial portion of its power from Quebec, while its economy flourishes through cross-border commerce. In fact, goods worth over $3 billion flow between Maine and Canada annually. But here's the surprising part. Culturally, Maine already resonates more with Canadian identity than American, with its rugged coastline, close-knit fishing communities, and French-speaking populations. It shares more similarities with New Brunswick than with states like Texas. Even politically, Maine frequently aligns more closely with Canadian policies than with Washington's directives. And let's not overlook the fact that Maine was originally part of Massachusetts until it separated in 1820. Having done it once, who could say it wouldn't happen again? Number 8. New Hampshire. What if a state decided that America was no longer necessary for its prosperity? A state that actively resists federal control, opposes high taxation, and prizes individual liberty above everything else. Does this sound familiar? That's because New Hampshire stands as one of the most fiercely independent states in the nation. Believe it or not, some residents are already discussing secession. This isn't just wild speculation. In 2022, a group of lawmakers actually proposed a constitutional amendment that would have put secession on the ballot. While it didn't pass, the mere fact that it was debated in the legislature is significant. New Hampshire has always stood apart with no income tax, no sales tax, and a live, free, or die philosophy that sometimes appears more aligned with Canada's decentralized governance than with Washington's federal oversight. The situation becomes even more intriguing when considering New Hampshire's economy, which is deeply connected to Canada. Trade worth over $8 billion flows between them annually, with numerous businesses in the state depending on Canadian partnerships for their survival. Additionally, from a cultural perspective, New Hampshire shares more commonalities with its northern neighbor than with states like California or Florida. It's a small, rural state with a passion for outdoor activities, winter sports, and a strong regional identity. New Hampshire has previously been at the center of political movements. The Free State Project, which encourages libertarians to relocate to New Hampshire and advocate for limited government, has already made significant impact. But what if the next step wasn't merely resisting federal policies, but completely leaving the United States? It might sound extreme, but in a state where independence defines the way of life, anything remains possible. Number 7. Minnesota. You might be surprised to learn that one American state is already so connected to Canada that leaving the United States might actually be logical. This state maintains deep economic ties, shares cultural similarities, and has a population that sometimes gets mistaken for being Canadian. That state is Minnesota. Let's examine this closely. Minnesota shares nearly 550 miles of border with Canada, and its largest trading partner is, unsurprisingly, Canada. In 2023 alone, Minnesota exported over $7 billion worth of goods across the border, making Canada essential to the state's economic well-being. But But the connection goes beyond finances. Minnesota and Canada share a similar lifestyle. The people are friendly, outdoorsy, and known for their distinctive accents and passion for hockey. The weather is brutally cold, just like Canada's, and the politics often align more with progressive Canadian policies than conservative American ones. There's also historical context to consider. Before Minnesota officially became a U.S. state in 1858, parts of it were actually under British governance, and its fur trade industry was heavily linked to Canada. Even today, many Minnesotans hold dual citizenship or have close family connections to Canadians just across the border. Here's where the situation becomes particularly compelling. Some experts believe that if the United States ever faced significant political turmoil or economic collapse, Minnesota would be among the first states to seriously consider other options. With its deep connections to Canada, it wouldn't be surprising if some residents started looking northward instead of westward for their future. Number 6. North Dakota. What would happen if an entire state relied more heavily on a foreign nation than its own government? This might sound absurd until you realize North Dakota finds itself in precisely that situation. This state might appear to be a quiet, overlooked part of America, but its economy is fundamentally tied to Canada's. Here are the remarkable facts. North Dakota exports more goods to Canada than to any other country, an astonishing $6 billion annually. But it extends beyond trade. Regarding energy, Canada supplies a significant portion of the state's power. In agriculture, North Dakota farmers depend on Canadian buyers to maintain their operations. Even for travel, a surprising number of residents regularly cross the border for healthcare, shopping, and employment. In certain towns, Canadian license plates are as common as American ones. From a political perspective, North Dakota's small government, pro-business mindset, and close trade relationships actually align more closely with Canada's western provinces, particularly Alberta, than with Washington, D.C. Here's a fascinating historical fact. At one point, there were serious discussions about North Dakota and Manitoba merging into a unified economic zone. While this didn't materialize, the concept hasn't completely vanished. So what happens if the United States ever experiences a major political or economic crisis? Given that North Dakota is already deeply dependent on Canada, could it eventually decide to formalize this relationship? It sounds shocking, but when a state's survival depends so heavily on a foreign country, the question becomes, why remain loyal to a system that barely acknowledges your existence? Number 5. Montana. What if a state had more in common with Canada than with the rest of the United States? What if its rugged, independent character led it to question whether remaining in America was the right choice? That's precisely the situation with Montana. Consider this. Montana already functions much like a Canadian province, sharing a 545-mile border with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. But here's the crucial point. These provinces aren't merely neighbors, they're economic partners. In 2023, Montana exported over $700 million worth of goods to Canada, making it one of the state's most important trade partners. Culturally, the people here embrace the outdoors just like their Canadian counterparts. Whether it involves ranching, hunting, or enduring harsh winters, Montana and Canada are remarkably similar. There's historical precedent for Montana being more connected to Canada than to the United States. In the 19th century, before officially becoming a state, much of Montana's fur trade was dominated by Canadian companies. Even today, many Montanans possess dual citizenship or have close family ties across the border. Some even joke that Alberta and Montana are essentially the same place, except one offers universal healthcare. Here's something rarely discussed. Montana is home to strong anti-federal government sentiment. Many Montanans believe Washington ignores them, and some would prefer to be part of a system that better aligns with their values and economy. If conditions ever deteriorated significantly, who's to say Montana wouldn't look north instead of east for its future? Number 4. Washington. Why does this state feel more connected to its northern neighbor than to the rest of the United States? Why are its major cities already financially, politically, and culturally intertwined with another nation? Washington isn't just close to Canada. It's deeply linked in ways that might make you wonder about its true future. Could a shift be more likely than people realize? The answer might surprise you. Let's examine the numbers. Washington's primary trading partner is Canada. In 2023 alone, over $20 billion in goods moved between them. That's not insignificant. That's a complete economic interdependency. It extends beyond trade. Washington relies on Canadian energy, with substantial amounts of hydroelectric power flowing south from British Columbia. Even its largest port, Seattle, is deeply connected to Canadian shipping routes, transporting millions of dollars worth of goods between Asia and North America. But here's the truly remarkable part. Washington isn't just financially tied to Canada, it's politically aligned too. This is one of the most progressive states in the country, with policies on healthcare, environmental protection, and social services that often resemble Canadian approaches more than American ones. Washington has also advocated for closer ties with British Columbia, including proposals for high-speed rail that would connect Seattle and Vancouver in under 2 hours. Some politicians have even suggested deeper economic integration. The cultural overlap is undeniable. From Vancouver to Seattle, people share the same outdoor lifestyle, tech-driven economy, and appreciation for coffee. In fact, many British Columbians live and work in Washington while still considering Canada home. If the United States ever experienced a major political division, it wouldn't be surprising if Washington started looking north rather than east. Number 3. Oregon. What would happen if a state felt so disconnected from the rest of the country that it began considering alternatives? What if its people, culture, and economy aligned more closely with another nation? That's exactly what's occurring in Oregon, and the shift is more serious than most people understand. First, let's consider the financial aspect. Oregon's economy depends heavily on trade with Canada, with over $4 billion in goods exchanged annually. But here's where it gets interesting. Oregon's environmental and social policies are more closely aligned with British Columbia than with its American neighbors. The state's approach to healthcare, sustainability, and labor rights more closely resembles Canadian policies than American ones. Some Oregonians already want to leave. You've probably heard of the Greater Idaho movement, where rural counties want to separate from Oregon and join Idaho. But here's the unexpected twist. Some residents argue that Western Oregon would be better served by joining Canada. It sounds extreme, but when your state constantly conflicts with the federal government, at what point do people start looking for a system that better reflects their values? The geography is also significant. Portland and Vancouver, Canada, not Vancouver, Washington, are practically twins. From outdoor lifestyles to progressive politics, the two cities feel more connected than Portland does to places like Texas or Florida. So if a major crisis ever forced states to reconsider their allegiances, don't be surprised if Oregon started looking northward instead of southward for its future. Number 2, Alaska. How does a state maintain an American identity when it's physically separated from the rest of the country? How does it stay connected when its economy, military, and daily life are more intertwined with another nation? Alaska might be America's last frontier, but look closer, and you'll see just how deeply tied it is to Canada. Could it ever break away? The signs might surprise you. Let's begin with geography. Alaska is significantly closer to Canada than to the U.S. mainland. In fact, the only way to drive from Alaska to the rest of the country is by traveling through Canada. And it's not just about location. This state is deeply connected to Canada's economy, with billions of dollars flowing between them in oil, seafood, and raw materials. Some of Alaska's largest fishing operations rely on Canadian waters, and Canadian companies own substantial stakes in Alaska's natural resource industries. But here's where things become particularly interesting. Alaska actually used to belong to Russia. While that might seem unrelated, it proves one crucial point. Alaska hasn't always been American. If the United States ever faced political upheaval, would Alaska decide to pursue independence? Or would it look north, where its economy already has deep roots? The military presence in Alaska is another critical factor. The state hosts some of the most strategically important U.S. bases, but Canada already plays a significant role in joint defense efforts. The North American Aerospace Defense Command integrates Alaskan and Canadian forces, meaning that in the event of a major geopolitical shift, Alaska and Canada would likely collaborate before anyone else. So if a day ever comes when the United States no longer feels like the right home for Alaska, don't be shocked if this state explores its options. Because when you're already functioning like an independent nation, making it official isn't such a radical idea. Number 1, Michigan. You'd be astonished at how connected this state is to Canada, so much so that it almost feels like part of it already. Michigan depends on Canada more than any other U.S. state, with $80 billion in trade crossing the border every year. Detroit and Windsor function practically as one massive industrial hub, with thousands of trucks crossing daily. Let's talk about the financial aspect. Michigan trades more with Canada than any other state, moving a staggering $80 billion in goods across the border each year. The Detroit-Windsor corridor represents one of the busiest trade routes in North America, with thousands of trucks crossing the border daily. If that connection were ever severed, Michigan's economy would collapse overnight. The auto industry, Michigan's economic foundation is heavily dependent on Canada. Factories in Detroit and Windsor are so interconnected that some vehicles are assembled with parts manufactured in both countries. If you've ever driven a Ford, Chevy, or Chrysler, there's a significant chance it was produced with Canadian labor, but it extends beyond finances. Michigan and Canada share infrastructure, including bridges, tunnels, and power grids. The state relies on Canadian electricity, and the Ambassador Bridge, the busiest border crossing between the two countries, is owned by a Canadian billionaire. Here's something remarkable. Michigan once considered joining Canada. In the 19th century, after the Toledo War, some Michigan residents actually wanted to join Canada instead of remaining with the United States. That didn't happen, but the sentiment hasn't completely disappeared. With its economy, energy, and even history tied to Canada, could Michigan someday reconsider its place in the United States? It sounds incredible until you realize it's already functioning very much like a Canadian province. So could these states actually break away and join Canada? Initially, it sounds like mere speculation, but when examining the facts, the connections are undeniable. From economies dependent on Canada to cultural and political alignments, these states are already closer to their northern neighbor than most people realize. And if the United States ever faces a significant political or economic crisis, who's to say that some of these places won't make a dramatic move? History has demonstrated that borders change, nations evolve, and sometimes what seems impossible today could become tomorrow's reality. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Your experiences might help someone else make the right decision.